So, without further ado, now drum roll, please. Let me introduce our moderator for today. We all know her and love her. She is an independent journalist, the author also of the $1 Million One Person Business and Tiny Business Big Money. So let me go ahead and introduce Elaine Pofeldt. Elaine, welcome. Take
Oh,
it away,
thank you
please.
so
The
much.
floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Helena, and thanks to Maddie Cohen, who is such a great supporter of this program and the great mind behind so many library programs. We're so happy to have you. I am so thrilled to do this program today because I feel like each of these coaches could be their own program. They have so much wisdom to share. And one of the early discoveries that I had when I looked at the data on $1 Million One Person businesses was that coaching and consulting was one of the biggest areas. It's within professional services, which is one of the biggest areas, but a lot of people don't really know how to transform their expertise into a thriving coaching practice. So that's what we're going to be doing today. And I just want to thank all of you for coming out. I know it's right before the holidays, but you're taking time for yourselves to grow your business and position yourself for success. So give yourself a pat on the back for making the time and tuning in, because this is just going to be chock full of great information. Before we start, I wanted to ask each coach to just tell us what you've been up to lately, because one thing that I found is with these businesses, the last time I talked to them is not recent enough. They're always up to something new. And I'm just going to go in the order in which I can see people. We have Jen Kem. Lots of people know about Jen and her work, so she almost needs no introduction. But Jen, tell us what you've been up to. I know you have some exciting projects recently.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. It's really exciting. And I am Jen Kem, and I run a company called Master Brand Institute. We are a brand management and strategy company. And lately, you're so right, Elaine. I think with the advent of AI, and when I say advent, it's been here, but the surge of AI usage, a lot of our efforts around building brands has come and focused more on now building your personal brand. And as a coach and anyone in the services industry, it's really important to understand how to build your personal brand in the communication around what your company does and what your company offers, even if you're a company of one. So that's really what we've been really focused on is finding those coaches, those consultants who are focused on helping people with their knowledge and their expertise. And so we're really excited about that. And that's our sole focus for 2024.
And Jen, you're an avid writer as well, right?
Yes, I have a book coming out. It's called Unicorn Team. It's coming out February 25th, 2025. And so my manuscript is due in a few months. So it's been, as you know, Elaine, as an author, it's a lot of work. And I'm really excited because one of the first things too that we believe is that to become a great personal brand, you have to master team, identity, messaging, and experiences. So time, TIME. So hopefully that's easy to remember. And so this first book is about team and how to set yourself up. Even if you're a person of one, you still need other people to support you, even if it's in a fractional way, even if it's a virtual assistant. And so how do you use those resources and support factors to help you build your brand?
Oh my God, I can't wait to read that. Definitely put that on your reading list and order it early, because one thing I know about Jen, I had been hearing about Jen for years, and people always said, whatever Jen says to do, don't question it, just listen to it and do it. And I know there's very few people who have that pull with their clients. So we're so happy to have you here. And that book, I just can't wait to read it. Bruce Eckfeldt, another person who just has an incredible reputation as a coach. I've been following his work for years. He has a very popular podcast, actually more than one podcast, and clients that just rave about him. And tell us about your current niche and all that you're doing. I can't wait to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've been in the leadership strategy executive coaching for about a decade now after I sold my tech company. And, it continues to evolve. I've developed a couple of podcasts, as you mentioned, found a couple of niches, one in service businesses, another one I've been involved in cannabis for many years. We've developed a lot of content and insight in that industry. That has led into some work in psychedelics, working with some of these companies that are doing drug development. But it's all niche strategies, like finding these areas that are highly regulatory and really growing quickly, have a lot of complications. I do really well in those spaces. So I kind of found these things to develop content around. I've got two new things going on. One is a partner, a new company focused on doing retreats in wilderness and outdoor settings. So I've been an outdoor guy for many years. I've done a lot of climbing internationally and stuff, and realized that there's a real opportunity to integrate not only kind of leadership and the strategic work I do, but actually get people out into the wilderness and into the environment, challenge them in different ways. Just work on that. And then I have a book that I'm working on next year called The Unbusy Executive, which is really focused on the idea of performance and busyness. And it's everything from kind of strategies around priorities to really looking at cycles around kind of neurochemistry around flow, like really what puts you in flow and how to really optimize that in terms of lifestyle. And then really kind of thinking through like how do you really drive value rather than just productivity. So it's kind of collections of things that I've kind of learned over the years and have developed, trying to codify and put in a book to really help rethink kind of busyness from an executive point of view.
Bruce has a very interesting mind, and I always find your perspective on things is very fresh. You do men's work as well, right? He was very active in EO. Weren't you running the New York chapter for a while?
Yeah, so I was in EO New York for many years, and I ran both forums and the accelerator program, which is based on some of the scaling up tools, and then run it for the East Coast as well. So I've had a long history in kind of entrepreneurship and leadership in that space.
And the accelerator program, for those who don't know EO, is the one that feeds into the full EO. So these are the future $1 million one-person businesses and tiny businesses that make big money. So we're really grateful for all that he did to position so many businesses for success. And Bill Gallagher, another coach who is kind of legendary in what he does, he works with scale-ups and is an incredibly talented person, also a surfer. Tell us a little bit about what you're up to.
Well, it's funny to pick up on what Bruce is sharing. We could talk about it these days, but you didn't used to be able to talk about it. My cannabis and psychedelic research started in high school, informally, right? And but today it is more commonly used among our entrepreneurs. I just did a strategy and annual planning, visioning journey medicine kind of thing last weekend, and this is like okay to talk about now and legal and in most cases and that kind of thing. And then the Global Accelerator Program for the Entrepreneurs Organization has got over 2,000 companies in it today, and I curate and customize the content for that on Vern's behalf, and train the trainers in that around the world. So we're all kind of interwoven. These days, I have a podcast, a more general purpose podcast around scaling up. We do 2 shows a week, and we have a new group of producers on that show now. So it's exciting, the kinds of folks that we're getting and interviewing, from the vice chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, retired, and the Chris Gronkowski. And so lots of interesting folks talking about scaling and growing their business from lots of different angles. And then I recently expanded our coaching after many years to allow more associate coaches and more companies. So we now have a more unlimited coaching. We have people all across the country that are starting to get towards like from 1 to 20 million, where I didn't do a lot of work in that phase, in that area in the past. So that's our new thing. Growth Navigator is what we call that.
Well, we're really happy to have all of you. And he was referring to Vern Harnish, the author of Scaling Up. When he said Vern, for those who don't know, I mean, some of you know I work closely with Vern as well. And before we start, what often happens on these events, and many of you are regulars, is we get deep into a topic, and then I realize we've never really defined the universe that we're talking about. So I wanted to start the conversation by just asking you, what is coaching and how is it different from teaching, consulting, et cetera? And I know this is a very personal question, so you may each have a different take on it, but Jen, do you want to start?
Yes, well, I think that also the other area that people sometimes get confused with coaching is therapy or therapy, you know. So I think that for me, the definition of coaching is bringing your talent to the table and having somebody be a reflection of that talent and helping you create a plan and to get motivated to do it. So we're not motivating you, you're motivating yourself, and we're showing you and connecting the dots by being and holding that space for what you're trying to achieve. So, you know, I think of coaches first. When I think of coaches, I think of who's the coach on an athletic team, and coaching has evolved, but I really still think it comes down to, if I'm Bill Walsh, I'm a San Francisco 49ers fan. So it's like, if I'm Bill Walsh, I'm looking for getting and extracting the best out of you and showing you that best thing, and then helping you direct you to how you can win on your terms. And so that's how I define coaching.
Love that definition of it, tapping into someone's inner potential. And anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll chime in. I think what I do is probably a mix. I'm primarily coaching, although, you know, we do get into consulting. I think at times I probably get into therapy at times, understanding kind of really what's going on in terms of thinking behavior and kind of driving behaviors and stuff. But I think it is important to just be clear, particularly when you're working with clients, on what role you're playing. So I often talk about switching hats, and, you know, coaching, yes, is really figuring out how to clarify for a client what they're trying to achieve, enable them to kind of think about the options and kind of strategies they can use, help them really think about all the kind of criteria they need to consider, and then helping them make a decision, and then helping them hold themselves accountable for the outcomes of things. We can get in consulting modes at times where we're actually looking at a situation, providing advice or giving some kind of recommendation on which direction to go. And then, yeah, sometimes we're therapy of saying, hey, look, I'm noticing this behavior. I'm wondering what's causing this. We probably need to address it if we're really going to get the results that you want. So it's a mix, but I think it's good to understand what those roles are and what they're not. And I think really what the challenge is when a client thinks you're consulting and you're coaching, and that's where you have problems. So clarify for yourself, clarify with your clients, and that's really the key.
Oh, I love this. This is really helpful because there are a lot of gray areas when you're a coach, but kind of sticking with the core of being a coach seems to be important.
Let me, if I could just add to that before you move on. What Bruce said, I think, is relevant. And also, Jen, like in the life coaching space, there's a lot of focus on, I'm just going to reflect and give you deeper listening so you have insights and things like that. But in business coaching, we go from teaching, advising, reflecting, adding perspective, sharing stories. It's a much broader range of style, of modality for it. And, you know, very often just having somebody, like working with somebody in the medical space, they were doing something that was very typical of their space. And I'm like, why would you do that? That isn't what most hairstylists do when they're dealing with a similar problem. They're like, why would you bring up hairstylists right now? I'm like, because you're dealing with human beings. And so giving them additional perspectives and ways to look at things, and, you know, it all creates a kind of a natural motivation that I think is relevant. I like to take all that and broaden it maybe to say, as a coach, both coaching the business and then within the business, the people coaching each other, I'm interested in keeping people in the game, whatever it is, like not quitting the project, the job, the thing, and yet continually leveling up. So whatever it takes to do that, right? I want to keep you in the game and keep you leveling up. And that is kind of maybe a broader definition of it.
This is very helpful because some of the people who are attending the event are thinking about becoming coaches, and they're not even sure how to package what their offering is, and others are running coaching practices and want to get more specific about what they offer. How, if you were going to give them one piece of advice based on all your years of doing this, how can someone position themselves for success in how they define what they offer when they're beginning an engagement or pitching an engagement? How do they tell the purchaser what they're buying, basically, when they enlist a coach?
Let's take it. I'll go. Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge, certainly in the beginning, is figuring out what is the problem you're solving, right? Like, what is the pain? What is the thing that a prospective client is struggling with? And I think a lot of times we end up trying to sell something that they don't need, or they don't realize that they need, or they don't feel that they need. And so, meeting the client where they are, figuring out what the problem is, how they see the problem, and then how are you actually going to solve that for them, right? And that can happen in many ways. But unless you kind of make that connection, you're not going to be, success is going to be unpredictable and probably highly variable unless you can kind of figure that thing out. Now, the other thing I would say is that's going to change over time. I think one of the things I learned early is that the clients I had in the beginning of my practice were pretty much the clients I didn't want within 16 or 18 months of my practice, right? Like, you have to keep kind of asking that question, and who do you want to work with and what problems do you want to solve, and elevating or transitioning or changing your practice to evolve with that is probably one of the biggest things I found with coaching practice.
Do you market to the problem? For instance, on your website, do you mention specific business problems that people tend to come to you with to attract people that need that solution? Or is it more organic, where you meet with someone who says, hey, I think I need a coach, and then you unearth what the problem is?
You do both, right?
Yeah, I was just going to say both.
Like, my website has the two problems I deal with all the time. I'm not growing enough, or I'm overwhelmed. And those are the two key problems. But in a conversation, somebody calls me and says, great, I think I need a coach. I'm like, okay, what are you trying to do? What's your pain point, right? But first, where are you trying to go? What's the pain? What do you think you want from a coach? And the fourth question, that was particularly effective shortly after the initial shock of COVID was, what do you want to spend on this?
Yeah.
Like, what budget do you have in mind? And instead of leading out with, I have these 3 packages, like, buy my package, and people be like, well, I want to do this, and I was kind of hoping that I'd get it done for this. And I'm like, okay, well, for that, I'm going to do this. And, and you could quickly problem solve for whether or not you could help them and what it would look like. And
I think that also, I just want to add, because I plus 100 on everything that Bill and Bruce are saying, I actually define a niche as not a demographic or a psychographic. A niche is exactly what problem you're solving. And if you're not asking yourself that first, what Bruce said, you're missing 90% of your start. You're going to come out of the gate wasting a lot of time, energy, and money on things you don't need, people you don't need helping you, all those things. And then one of the things that I like to say is, like, entrepreneurs can't lose their confidence. Now, we're going to get met with a lot of obstacles along the way, but if you lose that early in the game and you're starting out, it makes you question, what am I doing here? What am I thinking? The second thing I think is really important is start with what you know first. Meaning, a lot of people who want to become coaches want to become a coach of something they don't have a lot of experience in or expertise in. And that's cool, because what Bruce said is true. You're going to go and you're going to learn things, and you're going to pick up different skills, and you're going to find out the clients you actually want to work with. But in the beginning, you want to work with people that you actually know you can help, so that you can get the currency of testimonials and social proof that you're actually qualified to help people. And then I would say the third thing is, most people are really good at what they do, but they don't want to market what they do. And marketing and sales are your number one systems and strategies you need in the first part of your business, no matter what. So that's
the notion that it's really common in business coaching more than maybe any other category. People are like, well, I can't be coached by anybody who hasn't done what I want to do. And it's really kind of ridiculous. You need to have some foundation for the coaching. You need to have worked in the space, be somewhat familiar with it to some level of credibility. But if you think about peak performers in any realm, Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods, none of those people were coached by somebody who was better than them. But all the time in business, people want to be like, I want to have somebody who grew a tech business to $1 billion plus or whatever, and that's the only person I can be coached by. Like, if you go read the $1 Trillion Coach, right, you're going to see that all those guys got coached. Steve Jobs and others got coached by a guy who had not a tech background, right? So
he was a high school football coach. That's what he was.
The coach is committed to your winning and knows your world, your language enough, but isn't probably the best ones are probably not from your industry, are probably, more than anything else, they want you to win. They're smart enough to listen and command your respect. And that's the key, not having done what you wanted to do. In the middle of Travis Kalanick and Uber's all fiascos, I put a public post out and said, listen, Travis, I'm willing to coach you. And then another coach chastised me both publicly and privately. He said, you have no business doing that. And you haven't run a multi-billion-dollar blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, first of all, you don't have any idea what I've done or not done. And second of all, that's not where coaching comes from. And the problem that Travis is suffering with right now is being an a-hole. And I have a lot of experience in that. I've spent a lot of years being that, probably will continue to be that. And I think I can help him there.
Yeah.
Well, you're raising a good point, because I think there are a lot of people, especially starting out, who don't know how to sell their credibility as coaches to people that are in different industries. I mean, you all have the benefit of having run substantial size businesses prior to the coaching practice. I think that's one thing you all have in common. So I think that would command respect from almost anyone in business, that you've walked the walk somewhat. Do you think that's true for
You have to have
people
something.
that like have never run a business? Maybe they've done something else. Can they come in and coach someone who's running a business if the coaching is their only business that they've ever run?
I would say you have to have something, right? Like if you haven't been in a founder CEO seat before, then obviously you can't leverage that. But you got to look at your experience, look at the things you've done, look at the knowledge you have, and somehow connect it to the value that you're going to create to folks. And some of this is going to go to the type of coaching that you end up doing or the type of practice you end up building. You got to leverage the things that you have. And some of this stuff you can develop over time, and you can accrue some of this kind of experience and some of this kind of capabilities as you go. But certainly starting out, take stock of where you do have some assets and where you do have some kind of capabilities, leverage those, and then kind of build it on as you go. But that's part of the kind of strategic part of coaching.
There are coaches who effectively coach in business who had backgrounds in spiritual practices and mindfulness and psychology, and they have and football, right? So you could come at it, but you wouldn't want to come at that and say, let me tell you how to restructure your, I don't know, chart of accounts or something like that, right?
Well, that's a good point. So how do you take stock of what you have to offer? Let's say you haven't run a manufacturing business or something really substantial before. How do you take stock of what you do bring to the table and whether or not that would have value to a potential client? Is it just putting it out there in the marketplace, or is there sort of an assessment someone can do?
So we have a framework that we use called the unique message model. Because at the end of the day, I always tell people, you don't really have a marketing problem, you have a messaging problem. You don't know how you help people, or you're not able to communicate how you help people. And so we use a framework that I think hopefully will be helpful, because I think it's good for when you're in the beginning or you're pivoting, evolving, growing, scaling up. So the first is, what's your brand voice? Like, how do you actually want to have an authentic brand voice? Because a lot of people are showing up as their representative online and offline. And what I mean by that is they are speaking like they think people want them to speak. And there definitely is discernment that you need when you're, depending on who the audience is, but just people can tell when you're just being generic. I think the second thing is, what are the stories? And there are two stories that are important: the experience stories and the expertise stories. So just like we've been talking about here, you don't have to create $1 billion business to coach $1 billion founder, right? But what you do need to show is that you have some expertise in coaching. Even if you were a high school coach, let's say you were a high school teacher, and you were able to create some transformations within students, that humans are humans, right? Whether we think that even $1 billion founders are like smarter or better than regular everyday people, but the truth is psychology is psychology, and that's really what we're talking about here. Really understanding the human experience and how emotions play into that is really, really important. So the way that you cap that is with stories and experience and expertise stories. And I also say there's no such thing as needing to tell everybody your story, because all your stories, because that's another thing I think coaches get hung up on, is they want to tell their entire life story. And that's not actually helpful to your audience. What's helpful is if you can connect the dots between a story that you have that helps anchor your credibility with that problem that we talked about earlier that they have. And if you can link that, now you're creating a bridge, right? Yeah. And then one other thing to think about is, do you have a framework by which you solve that particular problem? And so I just mentioned a framework that we use, unique message model, right? Do you have a process or a method by which you can point out, hey, it's not just me here, it's also, there's a framework, and that framework doesn't have to be yours. It could be someone else's. For example, we talked about burn harness, scaling up. There's a framework inside of, there's tons of frameworks in that book. So you can go and use other people's frameworks and be the translator of those frameworks instead of trying to create from scratch what's not even been proven yet. And these are proven models. So a lot of times I think we try to go and create something new instead of saying, hey, how can I use my communication skills? How can I use my coaching skills? How can I use my advising skills? And then use other models that have been proven to then support, you know, the reason people would hire me.
Yeah, I'm just chiming in on Jen there. And I mean, a lot of what I've done is taken the scaling up framework and applied it to cannabis, to psychedelics, to services, right? Like figure out these niches where you do have understanding, expertise, knowledge, you know, experience with the framework, and kind of do that translation, say, okay, look, this is how we're going to use it, given your industry dynamic, given your stage of business, given your leadership team. So that can be super successful. And I was going to say on the, oh, no, I forget, I forget my point. We were talking just before that about focus. Oh, I'll figure it out and come back to it.
You can't focus on focus.
I guess.
You will be.
I got really excited about that one.
But Jen,
oh, I know.
really...
You were talking about feedback. How do you figure out your niches? So I would say talk to people, get feedback. Like this is actually this last year why I got into this whole doing this wilderness outdoor retreat stuff is I've been doing, I spent almost 6 weeks in Nepal last year climbing Ama de Blanc. I've done all sorts of things in South America. Like I've this whole other part of my life, which is crazy outdoor expedition adventure stuff. And I was talking, I could come to these client meetings and I'd talk, oh yeah, we just got back from Nepal. And they're like, you did what? That's so cool. We should, you know, we figure out how to do that stuff. I'm like, I hadn't really thought about that. Like getting feedback from clients and from people on what's interesting, what could be valuable, how could you add kind of new things to your kind of what you do for people. Oftentimes you're not in a great position to see it, right? Like talking to folks, whether they're, you know, people that know you professionally, otherwise, have them tell you, look, this is where your superpower is. This is where you create a lot of value. This is where it's really, you know, intriguing, like, and then leverage that and test it with your market. But if you just sit there and think about yourself, you have no perspective.
That's so interesting. So paying attention to what others find interesting about you. And Jen was talking about that with the storytelling. You tell your story, but through the lens of what would be interesting to the listener, as opposed to what would be interesting to your therapist or to your best friend or your neighbor, whoever it may be. So these are really great tips. And one thing I learned as a reporter is most people don't know what's fascinating about them. And it's very hard to look at yourself objectively and think, oh, those trips to Nepal are really interesting to other people, until they start asking you about them. So paying close attention to what other people are intrigued by about you, whether you're at a backyard barbecue or just people you know through work, what do you make small talk about? Sometimes the clues can be in there, because it is very hard to figure out what is your unique personal brand. As Jen was talking about, you don't just wake up one day and say, I know my personal brand. It starts to take shape through your living your life, basically, and living your business life. And it does bring us into the niche. I've known Bruce for a long time, and you weren't always in the cannabis niche. That started taking off as it became legal, and there were businesses springing up where basically operationally there was nobody with expertise in running a business in this industry legally. There were operations, but they might not have been legal.
Well, there's a lot of illegal operations.
Yeah.
It was a confluence. So after I sold my company, I started doing, I did some interim executive work, and then I started coaching, and a couple of friends of mine in the entrepreneur world started getting involved in cannabis. So I started helping them out. I was curious. I'd always been a professional athlete and everything. I'd never really got into cannabis personally much. And then I ended up breaking my back, and this confluence of going through post-surgery recovery on the back, and all my friends started sending me pot to help with recovery. And I was like, wow, this is actually kind of amazing. I'm pain management, inflammation, sleeping like a baby. So it was this kind of personal interest, professional opportunity confluence. And then it was like, okay, we're going to double down on this. And part of it was most of the other coaches in my space probably wouldn't have touched cannabis 6 or 7 years ago. And it was an opportunity. It was like, hey, I've got contacts, I've got personal interest. And we created the podcast to really build out a network, understand the market, understand the dynamics, like really kind of figure out what is this from a regulatory point of view, everything from how do you grow cannabis to processing it, to the regulatory issues, the legal frameworks, understanding the black market, right? Like all these things started to become important. And over 6-7 years, we've done a couple hundred episodes. It's been, I can call pretty much any cannabis CEO and at least get an interview for a podcast at this point.
Well, that's a profitable niche because there's a real need for someone who can bring the principles from other industries to this other really fast-growing industry where folks have had to operate without much access to the banking system, without the normal tax breaks and other things. So there are a lot of challenges built into it. It's far from the only niche, but it's a good idea when you're looking for a niche to find something where there's a very high need and you actually know how to solve that need. And probably you're even spotting that niche came from being there on the ground of so many different businesses and sort of seeing where there would be gaps in what they're doing. Do people have to have a niche though? I mean, could you just be a generalist dealing with mid-sized businesses, for instance, or is it better, do you think, to specialize?
Everybody has a niche, whether they realize it or not. There's always a niche, right? Oh, I'm the guy in Tulsa. I'm the woman in Dallas. Like people are North Dallas right there, or I'm the services person on the Eastern Seaboard. I only do funded companies. I only do companies ready to exit. I only do companies sub 5 million. Everybody's got something, whether they realize it or not. There's always some place that you're comfortable playing and that you probably like are most at home in. And knowing it and seeing it is definitely a process it takes. Just like understanding who you are is often easier with feedback from other people, because there's things that you do naturally, easily, effortlessly, and you don't appreciate, right? There's two fantastic folksy sayings. One is it's really hard to read the label from inside the jar. And the other one is that we'll never know who discovered water, but you can be pretty damn sure it wasn't a fish. And that we operate and we do things without thinking. And it's just how we are. There's things I do and my wife's like, oh my God, you do that like it's nothing. And everybody else struggles with that. I'm like, oh, huh. Why do people make that such a big deal? She's like, because it's not easy for them. I'm like, there's nothing to that. You just do this and that and this and
Well,
it's funny. Like you have to recognize where you have these natural strengths that you're not even aware of, that you're not even conscious about,
Oh, definitely. I mean, and I think they do get reflected back to you in the course of running the practice. By the way, thanks to the audience, their questions are just pouring in. So I invite all the coaches to take a peek in there because I want to cover all of those during the course of this. In terms of clients, do you vet clients to make sure they're coachable? And do you do it formally? Okay, Jen, you pop right in there with that. So tell so
it's like emphatic yes.
Yeah.
I think Bruce, it might have been Bill too. I don't remember, but earlier we were talking about you're going to get through some, not so ideal clients before you get to the ones that you really want to work with in a season. I like to look at my business as seasons, not just quarters or years, but there's a season. And especially when you're first starting out, you're going to get some people that are bad apples because you're figuring out your own messaging. You're figuring out how you're presenting and communicating, how you help people. And so the people you attract are definitely going to be people that you are fishing for, because at that point, you're testing out that messaging. So one of the ways that we've, evolved over time as a solution, and I really do think that you have to go and try and get bad clients so you know what you don't want in the future, because you'll never really know. Everything we think is in our head, but it's really on the field where you actually find out who you want to play with. And so what we do is we definitely have a vetting process. So now, and I think you can do this way in the beginning of your career as a coach, consultant, advisor, et cetera, asking a few key questions that align with your values and the value that you provide. and see and vet that, and then also create a network of people that you can refer people to. Because I think people assume I have to take all these people and they're all mine. Sometimes you just don't have capacity. But the other idea is like, they don't need you yet, or they don't need you at all. And to be that brave to say, I actually don't need that, so that you leave space open for the people who actually need you, it's a muscle that you really want to exercise while you're learning to grow your business, especially your coaching business, because people are tiring. They're exhausting. So
muscle. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's because it is something you have to strengthen. Jen, just before we move on, I wanted to ask you, what are some questions that you might ask someone, or even if you don't ask them, you're kind of asking yourself in your head as you talk to them?
Well, the first is one of the main questions we ask is, what do you think your problem actually is? Because if they can verbalize what their problem is, even if they say, actually, I don't know what my problem is, but what I read on your site or what I heard from this person who referred me, I think you might be an answer for my problem, then to us, that's the one we're really keying into. And the second one, frankly, is, can you afford us? And again, it's not like, we don't say, hey, how much money do you make? But we say, hey, we're in the 5 figures to start. Is that something you can do? If not, we have a network. We actually say that in the intake, that way that they also feel served instead of feeling rejected. And so those are 2 key questions we key into.
I'll chime in on that one. I think the questions. So first, I think there's direct and indirect filtering. I think there's, the direct filtering is asking them questions, conversational, like, is this the right fit? Indirect is going to be how you position yourself in the market, right? So the content you put out there, how you frame yourself, is going to naturally kind of attract and repel certain people. And I think a really good positioning in general, but particularly for services and stuff like coaching, like, your content should actually repel a whole bunch of people that you don't want, right? Because that's a lot of it is the cost of sales, the cost of actually engaging with folks is quite high on this level. And I don't want to be having conversations with folks that really are just not even qualified to begin with. But once you're in a conversation, so the budget one is interesting. I've kind of transitioned that to being, how much is this worth to you? Like, what do you want to achieve and how much is it worth to you? And then there's kind of the question of, do you have that money or not? Because even if they have the money, if the outcome that we're going to get is not worth the money, they're not going to buy. And sometimes if the outcome of the benefit they're going to get is high enough, they'll figure out how to find the money. So this budget thing can be a little nuanced, I find, in this process. The other one I ask a lot is, have you ever had a coach before, right? Because sometimes just the whole, someone that knows what it's like to be coached, if they've never done it before, that's a big unknown. And if they have done it before, then we can talk about, well, what's worked in that process? Like, what did you enjoy? What was successful? And then I can start to kind of figure out, well, is that the way I coach? And is that going to be a good fit? It's oftentimes where we kind of start, and then we can kind of get into the details of their problem. Honestly, a lot of times the actual problems they're dealing with are not the problems that we're really going to end up kind of involved with in the coaching. Those are kind of surface level things, and we'll get to deeper level issues as we go. But I want to know kind of how they're thinking about it and what their mind is like and what they're willing to invest in the process.
I've coached an awful lot of funded tech companies over the years, and there's a huge amount of jockeying and checking out, like, are you smart enough to listen to? And am I gonna listen to you or not? And so one of my key questions is, are you coachable? But everybody says they're coachable, and yet being coachable is not very typical of most human beings, right? And even if we have it for a minute, sustaining coachability is a challenge for a lot of us. We start at like 2 years old saying, don't tell me what to do. And we hang on to that. So you go around and they're like, are you smart enough? And there's this challenge and pushback. So I'll say, listen, what makes you think you're coachable? And they'll be like, well, and they'll give some answer. And then I'll scratch at it a little further. And I'll be like, give me some examples of other coaching you've taken and how did it go? And how about a coach who didn't work well for you, if they have some? And because you really want to hear, will they empower you as the coach? Because being uncoachable is probably the biggest frustration of clients of all sizes that I've worked with over the years, who are like, they're like, we want to be a scaling up company, and then, we want you, and they hire me, and then they start working with you, like, oh, we don't want to do this daily huddle thing, and we don't want to do this, and we don't like doing that. And I'm like, are you sure you want a scaling up coach? Because that's what we do. That's some of the stuff. Like, and it's a little bit like, I want to get a Super Bowl ring, and the coach says, okay, go run through the tires. And you're like, yeah, that's not really my path. See, I've listened to my heart, and that's really not what my soul needs. And like, oh, knock it off. Run through the effing tires. That's the program. Like, I don't care how comfortable you are, your path or whatever. Run through the damn tires. That's how you get to the Super Bowl.
Well,
And
you know what? You're actually getting to something which a lot of people see coaching because of external motivations. Like I know with my book stuff, people will say, oh, you know, my employees say I should write a book because I have all these great expressions, or my wife says I should write a book. And I will never take anybody like that because they're not internally motivated to do the hard work. You have to have internal motivation to be willing to be coached by whatever type of coaching it is. And the coaches always know how much work goes into things because they've worked with, even if they haven't been in that industry, they've worked with other people doing these same hard things. So they know often what the client doesn't know about what is going to be asked of them.
Yeah. We want to coach. We're going to knock this out in 90 days. Let's do the super plan. I'm like, no, it's going to take you 2-3 years to do this work. Like, it's not
absolutely. I just want to say yes, yes, yes. That's it.
I do. So a couple of things I'll do, in part because the kind of coaching that both Bill and I do is we're in leadership teams. So there's this question of what is the CEO willing to do, right? Like finding that internal motivation in terms of like, why do they want to grow? And honestly, if they say, well, because I want to make a whole bunch of money, I'm like, okay, that's probably not a fit, right? There's got to be something bigger than just cash that's growing, some kind of impact, some kind of personal motivation, right? They want to see what, you know, the next level looks like. The other thing I will often ask them is, what are you willing to do to get there, right? I'll ask questions like, is there anyone on your leadership team you're not willing to fire, right? Is there any client you're not willing to fire, right? And then we start getting into these like, okay, we're going to have some blocks, right? And some of these may be able to work around, but if they come to me and say, yeah, no, I'm not willing to change anyone on the leadership team. No, we got to keep all the clients we currently have. No, we don't want to open any new markets. It's like, okay, there seems to be a lot of sacred cows here that we're not going to be able to kind of play with, which is going to really limit what we can do. And so those are that give me early insight about, look, is this really going to be a good fit? Are we going to be successful? Because ultimately, like, I only want to work with companies going to be successful because that's my reputation, right? Like, I don't want to take on a company that's not going to go well, because that's going to be one less, feather in my cap in terms of being able to get more clients going forward.
Oh my God, that is such a good point. It takes courage to leave the space in your calendar when you have monthly expenses due in your business and the wrong client comes across your threshold. So what is the best way to package and sell your services as a coach? Is it monthly retainers? Do you have a program with a defined ending, a course? There's some questions in the Q&A about that. Do you have a point of view on that?
I can share about, so I started coaching 18 years ago on the side while running another company. And then 10 years ago,
by the way, do you mind saying what
it was sure. It was called Lori Bond Design. It was a fashion jewelry business. My wife had started the company, and we grew and we sold in over 600 stores, and we manufactured in multiple factories in Asia, and we sold on QVC and things like that. So I started coaching on the side and training as a coach, facilitating things like that. And then 10 years ago, I exited that company and I went full-time coaching. And for the first year, I tried to do my own thing and do my own way. And I sold like CEO coaching packages for generally like 3 months. And they would renew and go every 3 months and that kind of thing. And then I did public speaking workshops and that kind of thing. And I did it like all over the world. And I was really excited about it, except the revenue was really lumpy and frustrating. And I wasn't charging nearly enough. And I don't know where I came up with all that I came up with. I mean, I did have an advisor at the time, and I had been doing some stuff on the side. But then a couple of my buddies were involved in the scaling up thing. They're like, come on over here and work with us and use our things and stop working so hard and doing everything on your own. And that was really useful advice, because when I did the certification, I bought the tools, I added credibility. So they were established, well-known things, much more than like my own frameworks or whatever, that I have some, but it gave a good foundation and a brand name, that kind of thing. And then all of the learning from the community, what to charge, different ways of structuring it, like all the things that we shared, right? I went from charging like $1,500, $2,500 a month to charging $5,000 a month. Boom. And I've got much stickier. So instead of selling 3 months, I started selling annual auto renewing contracts. And working with one CEO, I worked with the whole leadership team. So all of that stuff just made it a lot easier. And then because it wasn't just Bill Gallagher selling Bill Gallagher, it was a lot easier to defend pricing and things like that. No, that's just what we charge in this community and for this kind of thing. And now, of course, all that's increased over time as I've become clear about the value we produced. And there's no faking it anymore. But in the beginning, there's a really good chance you're bluffing, like, oh, this is what it costs, and we produce these values, and like that kind of thing, and you're just kind of hoping it's true, I think, a lot of times in the beginning. But when you get some experience and when you work around other coaches, you go, no, this is what it costs because that's what it works, and this is what we do. And so it's really helpful to buy into something, to get part of something and not try to do everything on your own.
Yeah, 2 comments. I think one thing I learned, this is maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and when it comes to kind of pricing, is that I want to be generating somewhere between 5 to 10x my coaching fee in sort of tangible returns for the client. So, if I'm going to charge $100,000 a year working with a client, like I want them to drop somewhere between $500 and $1 million of extra profit to the bottom line. So once I kind of understand that equation, then I can figure out, well, how big does a company need to be to drop that kind of revenue to the bottom line? Like I can't be working with $1 million companies, right? I've got to be working with 25, 50, $100 million companies where that kind of investment can lead to that kind of return. And that return is really possible. So there's a little bit of math that you have to do to figure out, okay, well, whatever I'm going to charge, the client has to get some kind of return on. So then I got to figure out, well, either I need to adjust what I do and what I charge, or I need to adjust the client so they're getting that kind of benefit. The other one is kind of your engagement model is another one where you kind of dial in. Like I've kind of landed, or I've kind of developed over the years, this intensive kind of approach where I do a 3-day intensive session where I literally run them through the entire kind of framework very quickly and get a first pass in 3 days, which most other coaches in our world will take a year, 2 years to kind of go through this, all the kind of pieces. I want to get them to a roadmap and get to them a first pass who can figure out where all the holes are, and then we can start filling in the gaps. And I'm very iterative. Now that happens to work well for these companies that are in really dynamic markets, regulatory changes, where like if we took 2 years to go through a strategy, by the time we finish the last part of the strategy, the beginning of it would be totally outdated. So it was kind of a way I had to work given the nature, but it ended up becoming a little bit of a signature program, right? And so now that's kind of my thing. I come in and run these really intensive strategy sessions, and I attract clients that want that, and I can charge a lot of money for it because it's really valuable for those types of companies.
And reading between the lines, it sounds like you're tracking some key performance indicators or other metrics like profit to the bottom line, something achieved that is tangible, so that you can, when you say, what is it worth to you, you both know what you're talking about. Is that correct?
Yeah, I literally have a little worksheet. Once we're kind of in through kind of the early prospecting stages, I literally run them through a worksheet and say, like, how much are you making per year? I usually sit down with the founder and say, how much money do you want to get out of this company? When you exit this thing, how much cash do you want to have in hand? What do you think your ownership percentage is going to be? What's going to be the tax rate, right? Like we need to figure out what is the equity table. Like we literally back into, okay, well, you need a company that's this big. How big are you now? How many years do you want to do that? This is the growth rate we need to achieve year over year. And we basically develop a plan for how they're going to get to that exit. And sometimes we look at that and you're like, you're on crack, right? There's no way we're going to be able to get to those kind of numbers. Either we need more time, or we need to change the equity structure, or there's got to be some logic. But once we have that logic, I've now connected getting started with me to this future outcome that they want. And now we just have to execute. Now it's like, okay, here's how we do it. And oftentimes people just don't even know why they want to coach, right? Why do they want to, why do you want to do this? What is the outcome that you want? Is it reasonable? Is it not reasonable?
I want to jump on that why should I coach thing when we talk about packaging, because I think that there's a lot of noise online that is, hey, become a coach, sell courses. Well, I'm like, you're not a coach if you just sell courses, right? In fact, I say, if you're just starting out, please don't sell a course or a membership. You would be freaking crazy to do that. You're going to lose all your money and you're going to feel like poop. Okay. So what you do in stage one, because I want to dial it back to like, how do you set it up? You want to work with as many one-on-one clients as you can, capacity wise, and that you can give the most value in the first stage. And use a course or another framework, which we talked about earlier, could be scaling up, could be a ton of other frameworks to teach from, so that you can get those outcomes that Bruce and Bill are talking about in the early stages, depending on who your audience is. Because some of you guys are health coaches, I can see, some of you are business coaches, some of you are life coaches, and they are very different. Okay. So, but at the end of the day, when you're first starting out, if you're not, if you're trying to market and monetize a course or a membership because you think that's the best way to get to the money, it's not going to happen. You know, you would be the biggest outlier and unicorn that I know if you could do that right out of the gate, because you need to build an audience. And so, but you still have to make money. And so having one-on-one clients first, and how do you price that? Well, you base it on, I think, some of the figures that we're talking about earlier, like how much value can you bring depending on the outcome. Let's say you're a health coach and you are, let's say, I don't know, a fat loss coach. I actually work with a client who she has it's ridiculous. She's done $65 million in 2 years because she is committed to fat loss. And it's not popular now because of body shaming and all these things. And she was afraid to say, if I say fat loss, people are going to get mad at me because I'm a woman. And I was like, but that's what you do. And that's what your program is based on. So go and get those results and then go build a course and go and make your clients your best salespeople. Ask them for referrals, create a referral network around them. And, you know, 2 years later, she also had very good business acumen, just to let you know, because she came from another business, kind of similar actually to yours, Bill, in the previous. She sold jewelry. And so she understood the basics, but she was going into a whole new niche. And so I think that the allure of, you know, set it or forget it money through courses and memberships in the early days is not the route to go. So I would go one-on-one. I wouldn't even go to group yet. I would go to one-on-one, and then I would create my own process. In Bruce's case, he said strategic sessions first before he decides to offer them an opportunity to work long-term if it's a good fit. Because at least in those 3 days, I bet that, you know, Bruce, you're getting really good outcomes because they're seeing at least, hey, this is what we got to work on. They get to decide next if they want to work on it. But I do the same thing. People have to work with me and my small team one-on-one first. And then we decide, can you move into a more retainer-like mode with us if it makes sense to do that? But I love strategic VIP days and things like that as a model because it allows you to, again, get deep, potent workout using a framework and an outcome and a deliverable that you can hand off and say, this is what we did. We agreed up front, this is what you're getting. And this is what we left with. Now, what do you want to do next? And again, you might not be the next person. You might not be the next company for them to work with. But if you can show them what's next, then you're always going to have sales coming into your business because you can get it from a referral from a great partner, like, you know, business partner, or you can get it from your own programs and services. But starting first with that deep assessment type of work, I think is really important.
Simon Sinek gave a massive TEDx talk, right? And then he wrote a breakthrough, huge bestseller book. But for years before that, he did small workshops and small sessions in his apartment in New York, right? Like working with people. He honed that effing thing forever and ever, helping people figure out their why statements and how to apply it and all that kind of thing. And, you know, now he's got a new thing, but you don't just like wake up out of bed and take somebody's course on how to create an online course and then launch a thing and suddenly you're the guru of it because you hired a content marketing firm to do some posting for you. Like, that's nonsense, right? You're going to spend a lot of money and accomplish nothing. You got to do some work, figure out where your magic is and like what you're fabulous at. And then, like you said, be willing to repel some people. So, you know, choosing like fat loss, that's strong language for people today. But look, strong language, attract and repel, right? Don't create some watered down nonsense that like doesn't upset anyone. And unless maybe you just want to sell to big corporates, like that might work if you have. But even then how are you going to get some attention and break through the noise and establish some credibility? You've got to do something to figure out where you play, what you're good at, what kinds of customers you work with, what value you create. I work with many very small stage companies and with very, very little revenue, but they had a lot of funding and they had a huge goal. I worked with a husband and wife team and a small number of folks, and they were like, we want to be number one in the world within 5 years. I'm like, love that game. Let's play that game. And in their category, and there was some reason to believe that they could do it. But could I create the value? I was very clear I could create the value, right? So then I charged them a lot of money, even though there wasn't a lot of money yet, for the kind of work we were going to do and for what we could produce.
So this is an interesting discussion on how you're structuring the business. It looks like there are discrete offerings, like a one-day workshop, which could have a flat fee and potentially a retainer arrangement. And as you build confidence and results as a coach, you can transition to bigger and bigger ticket purchases, but it's not an overnight thing. You know, as Bill said, you don't just take a course on creating a course, because like, there is so much. I'm so glad someone said that.
There's so much of that. Like,
there's so much of that. And we hear only about the successful courses, you know, the ones that maybe some of us have taken.
Of course.
Well,
But
great marketers market to the outlier. So I hope you guys can hear that. Back to repelling clients. Great marketers will market to the outlier result. They will talk about their best results so that a majority of people can go and get it. And I think that the course and membership industry has done that very well, marketing wise. Whether you like it or not, they've done it very well, but it's not going to get you the results that you want. And I think we're all saying, like, we hope that you want to be, I hope that you want to become a coach because you want to change people's lives and get paid for it. Ultimately, you know, I mean, that's change people's lives, then get paid for it. You know, that's the relationship. And my motto is, I work really hard to make my life easy. So what I mean by that is, I'm willing to do what I call the 2 F words in branding and business, which is friction and fear. Okay. Like, you have to be able to face friction and fear if you want to get good and be known as the best or the most unique in your area. And I think that we are trying so badly to avoid fear and friction, which is completely human, but not good in business. Okay. In being human, normal. We all face friction and fear. We don't like it. No one likes conflict, internally or externally. But if you want to be good at your business, those are 2 F words you need to embrace.
And Jen really lives this, because I'm a Facebook follower and I see your Facebook posts, and she's not afraid to be controversial and put herself out there. And it's essential. You have to get in the ring, and you have to be willing to have some people not like you and react strongly to what you say, because you will be drawing in the people that will benefit from how you are, how you do things, how you say things, if you're really real and you say who you are. In terms of marketing, we touched on this a little. This is a form of marketing, just being authentic in social media and doing great work for people who will naturally refer you. Those are 2 really great ways to get new business. I'm sure there are lots of people on this call who have spent money or are about to spend money on hiring a marketing team. Should they do email marketing? Should they be on Instagram? Whatever. They have a million questions on these things. What advice would you give them for coaches? Is there sort of a best practice? Should they be on YouTube, you know, expressing their voice and sharing their personality? You know, where do people go to find coaches? And, you know, I may even asking the right question here.
Yeah, I mean, my first thought is it's less about kind of that platform and more about the message. Like, what is the message you're trying to get out there? And I think having a position, whether it's controversial or just, you know, insight based, I think one of the best things I ended up did, it was somewhat fortuitous. So like I had a relationship with Inc. through my company, and was able to sort of column fairly quickly in my career. So I've been writing for Inc. for probably 5 or 6 years. And my strategy for writing Inc. articles is that I keep a notebook. And when I'm talking with my executives and when they come up with like a question or an issue, I just write it down and then I write an article on it. And I will often send the executive the article once it's published, saying, hey, look, we had that conversation last week or a couple of weeks ago about this, and I wrote this article. And I get comments from other executives. I can't swear here, I guess, but they literally say, get out of my head, right? This article that you just wrote on this, this was exactly what I was thinking last week, and I want to talk to you more about this. right? And so I'm using kind of the insights about what's happening in my clients' heads and saying, well, if they're thinking this, there's probably a dozen other people that are thinking this. And I can turn that into an article. And so that creating messages that resonate or kind of get into your prospect's head around, oh, these are the questions they have, these are the struggles they have, this is the situations they're in. And then whatever you want to do, if you want to write about it, put it on YouTube and Instagram, like those are just medium. I would choose those based on where is your audience actually absorbing content that is meaningful for them. But it's more about the message. What are you actually writing about, and less about the platform?
And where do you get the questions? Is it from inquiries people make to you about whether you can solve a certain problem, or is it?
These are conversations I have with my clients, right? Or prospects that good prospects that I want to work with. I just pay attention to what they're talking about, challenges they're having, things they're struggling with, right? If I can create some kind of content that hooks into that, like that's where I'm going to get traction and conversation going.
That's very reassuring, because people feel they have to spend a lot on market research, et cetera. You're basically turning your own conversations into long tail SEO phrases, that you can then turn into.
One, they were struggling on email protocol. Like they were just like, it was talking about, oh, like we have too many emails. So I wrote an article on like I think it was like 7 or 9 best practices for sending an email. Right. And it was like, I got all these hits on it. It was this weird kind of, but it happens to be something that this team was struggling with, and other teams were too. It doesn't have to be big.
Go ahead.
I think it's useful to say though that, I've had a show for years now, and it's popular. It gets lots and lots of listens and downloads, whatever. But whether you do a blog, a show, like whatever kind of things you do, I wouldn't kid yourself that that's going to produce a flood of leads for you. Even maybe Bruce gets more than I do, but I would say doing my show is valuable and useful. And I'm over 500 episodes now after some years. But it doesn't produce a deluge of leads. What it does do is keep me top of mind for people. It does sell other products and services. It does make a very easy sales decision for people. They can listen to a couple shows and go, you're our guy, you're not our guy. But it's not a flood of leads, even now with like 20,000 downloads a month, and doing a show a couple times a week. Like it's just not, it doesn't work in that way. And I think if you go and convince yourself that it's got to have some huge payoff and create some big flow of leads through your funnel and whatever, that's more like fantasy of like new marketing fantasy, that I just don't. People say it, and maybe it's working somewhere for somebody, but I think you do it, it's valuable, but it's not a panacea. It doesn't solve problems automatically.
I want to say too that, call me old lady marketer, I don't care. Bottom line is, the principles of marketing don't change based on the platform or the mechanism. So marketing is the consumption of and understanding human behavior. That's what marketing is. And then it's creating mechanisms to bring that message to the right people, right? So I look at it as, if you really want to know what's working now, because that's kind of what I see, is there's 3 strategies you should be thinking about. What's your brand? What's your business? And how are you as a leader? Brand, business, leader. And if you are starting a business as a coach, or you're growing a business as a coach, based on all the research we've done and all the clients that we've worked with, YouTube and LinkedIn, that's all you should care about. Even if you're in the space of, let's say, woo, or a controversial space like cannabis, even though cannabis has become more mainstream, right? Because LinkedIn is where people have money and they're actually serious, generally speaking, and YouTube is natural SEO because Google owns YouTube. The second thing that's working really well is, instead of starting your own podcast, even though I totally believe in it, because that's a great way to grow your personal brand, is get on other people's podcasts.
Yes. Go be on 100.
Yes. Go even if they
before
have
you start
2
your
followers,
own show.
Right. Even if they've got 2 followers, because part of it is not just you getting the leads, and it's you getting the practice of speaking what you do and how you help people. And so honestly, the amount of leads that we get just from me being on podcasts is ridiculous. And at first I was like, I don't want to be on these podcasts, because I was so busy working and doing my thing. But wow, I'm a believer, and it's the easiest thing for you to do is literally go pick out all you're not going to get on the top 5 podcasts to begin with, but you're going to find there's over 1 million podcasts out there. Just find people in your niche or somebody who has the audience you want to, what I call brand jack. So you want to kind of connect yourself to that podcast audience and say, I have this topic and I'd love to support your audience with it, right? And a lot of people don't want to do that work to write those emails or to DM them on LinkedIn, but that's your fastest way to growing platform and money. If you want to do it easier, not easy, but easier.
Let me say one more thing. As a host who gets pitched guests all day long, don't come out me with, or anybody else, with your credibility and 10 different topics you could talk about. Pick one topic and soft sell your credibility. One interesting, compelling topic. Come with your strong topic that you should be a guest on their show and tailor it for each show. Like, here, I want to be on that. Don't just blast out, he built a 7-figure business while struggling as a single dad and whatever. Every entrepreneur built a 7-figure business and while going through struggles. It's not exceptional, right? Like,
yeah. And I think that their VA, like you could tell that their VA is just sending you, because I have a podcast too.
Yeah.
They're just sending these form letters where you're like, hey, can you take a little time to customize it? People, back to OG marketing old lady. Okay. This is the stuff that makes relationships happen. And in today's world of what I call the 3 A's that you cannot avoid, AI, automation, and Asians. And I can say that because I'm Filipino. Okay. What I mean is by Asians is outsourcing. Okay. You can't compete with that, but you can stand out by taking frameworks, taking these models and templates, but at least taking the time to customize them. One more thing I wanted to say. Third thing is there's so much gold under your feet in your backyard. So meaning a lot of you aren't even leaving your house to go to the New York State Library, for example, or New York City Library. To go there, you're going to meet people or create your own little workshop locally. Oh my gosh, there's so much money there. There's a lot more money in offline than there is in online when you're first starting out. And then you use online as a catalyst, as fuel after you've been able to build a base in wherever you live. And if you're like, hey, I live in Hoboken, not Hoboken, because I know that's a real city, but like if you live in the boonies, there's a major city somewhere. Once a month, go to the major city. I had a client, actually, Elaine, you covered her, Kathy Guggenauer. She grew this VA business. I was her advisor and consultant. And she lives in what do they call that? The Southern Riviera.
The Ozarks.
She lives in the Ozarks.
By the way,
right.
just as an aside, she has been in this series, and she also has done her own program for the library. She's a big favorite at the library.
Oh, she's great. I mean, she's just great. And she's an example of a woman who was 65 when I met her, gray hair. These were her words. I'm fat and I'm old. Why would anybody buy anything from me? Those were her words. And I said, first of all, you are the most charming person I've ever met. And she goes, but you told me to go do something. I live in the boonies. I live on a 2-acre thing. She gets her internet, you guys, from a disc or whatever you call them on her property. She can't even get Wi-Fi where she lives. So I said, what if you went to St. Louis, because she lives in Missouri, once a month, and you did a talk around how people could use their expertise to be freelancers for small business, which is what she does. She just started doing that once a month. And then 2 years later, she has a multi-million-dollar business because then she used the online mechanisms to then support her offline efforts. And I think, again, we try to take the shortcuts. And the shortcut is really you being willing to do the hard thing so that you can have the easy thing. That's the real shortcut. So
that's the truth. And she's in my book, and she learned how to be a VA who did blogging for real estate professionals. Then she turned that into a series of masterminds for other people who wanted to do that. This was over a period of time. Then she started doing events, and I actually went to the live event in Florida last year, and she's hilariously funny. That's one of her strengths. And she knows her audience really well. She's gotten to know the VA world. She just knows them inside and out and has very avid fans, but she is scaling up, and her goal is to, I think, sell the business for 7 or 8 million by the time she turns 70. And so she's very open about all these things that she's working on. And I think that's part of her ability to sell is she's so transparent. There's a question from an anonymous attendee, a health coach charging $150 an hour, who wants to raise his rates or her rates, and usually functional medicine doctors would be the ones who are able to get the higher rates. And so what I was wondering about when we were talking about this with marketing, I know with Kathy, for instance, she started gradually increasing the cost of the different masterminds by offering more advanced levels, basically. So in a way, she's offering access to another group of similarly accomplished VAs. It's partly community that she's offering, but for someone who is in a service business where there are certain rates that most people charge, and you're
I
offering.
would say don't play that game. Don't sell hourly. Sell the result. So here, I'm going to charge you how much per pound, right? Like if it's a weight loss thing, how much are we going to lose here? Well, we're going to lose 50 pounds. Great. What would you be willing to pay to lose your 50 pounds? And then base it on that. Somebody tells me they want to be number one in the world. I'm like, okay, it's probably going to cost you 300 grand working with me on this thing. And we're going to work on it this way. No problem. That's a easy spend, right? And there's some proof along the way, but focusing on and selling, even when I had my software company years ago, I was going up against people who were selling a long time ago, 150 an hour software development. And I had a friend who wanted to be a client, and he's like, God, that seems like so much money. And I'm like, you know what? We don't charge that way. I'm going to charge you for the deliverable. So you want to produce a project that looks like this in this time frame. You want to spend $75,000. Let me see what I can do. And I came back and I said, okay, if we do this and work in this way and these things in this process, I'll give you that for $75,000. And he said, okay. And now in the end, what was I making per hour? About $575, right? Mm-hmm. And an amount that would have horrified him. But I think that you change the focus there. Don't charge 150 an hour. When I started, after the first year of very up and down struggling things, and here's my up and down struggling, right? For me, I spoke across 23 cities and 13 countries, and coached a whole bunch of people. It was probably a six-figure year one, and I considered that a struggle and a failure. But then a buddy of mine's like, hey, come join the Scaling Up Coaches. And then another guy in that community said to me, listen, here's what you do. Go have lunch, beer, drinks, coffee, whatever, with everybody in your world, not just your friends, but your vendors, your banker, your attorney, like your wealth management firm, like everybody that you could think of, and tell them that you'd like their advice. And you'd like to pick their brain for a minute. And people are wired to give you help. They don't want to be sold, but they're wired to help you. And tell them what you're up to. Hey, I'm trying to start this coaching business, be full-time because I'm passionate about this, because I want this to be my last stage of my career. And then ask their advice and tell them what you're working on, that kind of thing. And that's what I did. And they said to me, it's really interesting. I think it's great that you're doing that because of this and that. They gave me that reflection that Jen and Bruce talked about. And then they said, my buddy Bruce over there, he could probably love to talk to you right now. Let me make an introduction. They got invested in my winning because they were giving me advice, and they made introductions for me. They said, our firm could really use something for our clients. I think you could probably lead a workshop for them. Why don't you come in and do it? We'll host it. We'll feed them breakfast and give them a half-day workshop in Scaling Up. Like, I got booked right away from just asking friends, because that's my strengths, my network being sold for whatever I had. And I didn't even have to figure it out, right? Probably the most important thing to do to get started is that, and then look to somebody else to figure out your offering and your pricing. Copy somebody else that is credible for you. Those two things, and next year is a better year for you.
Oh, these are really great pieces of advice. What about teaming up with other coaches? Say you have a skill set in one thing and they have a skill set in another. Is that a fruitful way to form a business, or is it better to just come together periodically if you need that expertise? Have you seen anybody do it as a team?
So I have associate coaches now. I have somebody working right now for me today with a team that I couldn't be with today. He's leading them through some annual planning and strategy work, a couple hours from here. I've got another guy later this week who's leading an accountability group. I've got subject matter experts on things. So I have accountability group, and these are people who are not yet certified, or who, you know, they have some background, but they're still kind of leveling up, and you know, they make some decent money at it working, and then they expand my ability to reach more people. So yeah, you can probably work with others that way.
That's
Yeah,
a good
it's a
point,
slight
because
difference.
for people who are newer to the field, that might be an opportunity to learn it, to team up with an existing coach who, I know you're a good rainmaker, Bill. Like, people always come to you and want to work with you. So if you're good at bringing in business, then someone who doesn't have the track record yet, or doesn't have the
Yeah, I
experience,
can get started,
get
right?
confident.
Or maybe they're good at, they have a little bit of network, but they don't have the credibility and the chops yet to close them, or they're not sure what the offering is, and they need some things like that. In our world, and this is pretty much my experience, most of our new coaches take about 6 months to finish their sort of certification training. They start making money and doing stuff in the beginning, but that's the sort of, to get fully up to speed is about 6 months. And they probably spend, I don't know the exact number, but probably spend 20 grand on that. So there's some investment of time and money to do that. Meanwhile, they have to be paying their bills and keeping their rent, mortgage, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think there's three different kind of angles here. I mean, one is when you're starting out, how do you kind of, you know, hook your wagon up to something that is going to help you with momentum and potentially, you know, fill in some of the gaps, you know, get you kind of learning, getting the process going. Then there's like, when you're in your practice, finding kind of complementary services and skills that either allow you to sell better. It's like, you can sell what you do better when you couple it with something else. So 1 + 1 equals 3 for a client, like finding those kind of strategics. And I have a couple, like I keep a kind of a network of people that are experts in different areas, whether it's technology or finance or kind of talent, where I will bring them in for particular accounts where I either can't or don't want to do that aspect of it. So, but I can sell something better if I bring it together. And then there's what Bill is doing now, which is how do I expand and scale my kind of impact in the business that I have by bringing on capacity and resources, either on a full-time or kind of a freelance joint venture basis. But yes, I think each time you're kind of balancing what's the risk and reward, right? Like if I bring on this person, what does it gain in terms of my ability to sell or my profitability? But then what does it cost, either in terms of complexity and relationships and stuff? And so, you know, coaching is still a fairly intimate business. And so you need to look at what is your brand and what are you, like, how are you positioning yourself, and how do you maintain that as you bring on other people that are going to be representing you and executing on your work?
These are great tips. We have so many good questions this time. I'm going to do a quick lightning round and go through some of these questions just so the attendees can walk away with answers. All right, this one is a little bit specific, but I think we could take it to a higher level to make it interesting to everybody in the audience. What are the steps involved in starting a corporate wellness program as a health coach? How do I earn the trust of small, medium, and big companies to trust us if we know with strong confidence that we can provide significant support for those suffering from all kinds of symptoms and medical conditions? Now, I know because I've covered the medical industry, it's a little different from business coaching because you're not supposed to be in medicine to make money. So it's expressed differently. They have to be sustainable, but the way that you talk about things might be different. Any insights on that?
I feel like we answered the question, actually. Like, I think that question has been answered, right? Is hook your caboose to a train that's already moving. So create relationships if you don't already have them. But I bet you do. You're probably one person away, you know, that Kevin Bacon effect, of somebody who would be good for you to first be a service provider on their train versus you trying to create your own piece of it. Whether it doesn't matter what kind of coach or consultant you are, whatever that industry is, go be an intrapreneur, I like to call them. That's what Unicorn Team is about, is actually how can you attract intrapreneurs who want to be on the same mission as you, right? Where the train is headed this way, let's all go together. And so I feel like that's been answered by saying, you know, go in and find that relationship and say, this is what I have to offer. Do you know anyone that I can talk to? And then be able to say how you help them.
say also simply, if you have a CEO best or some other C-level exec who you are their health expert, and then you're going to be like, I've got a program for your whole company. Failing that, you're not probably going to get picked as a entry-level person, right? Like, but if you fix the health and fitness of a CEO or C-level exec, then you could work with their company. Really good chance.
That's good advice.
This is great advice. We're actually running out of time. I'm getting the signal. So instead of going through this whole list, what I'll suggest is that all the panelists, if you can put your best way to contact you on social media in the chat, that way the attendees can write to you directly if they have any questions and want to follow up. Maybe they want to use you as a coach, who knows, right? But what I'd love to ask you is, as we wrap up, if you could each offer a few words of advice for someone who is looking to position themselves to be viewed as the consummate professional they are as a coach, how do they put their best foot forward and set themselves up as they leave this event to take the next step in their business and, win those new clients, position themselves better? And, any of the topics we've talked about, what would be the parting words that you would share?
Yeah, I'd say three things I'm always looking at when I'm working with early coaches. One is figuring out your framework, right? Like, what is your process? What's your framework? What's your system? And some way in which you help clients. Two is learning how to coach, right? And some of that is just reps, right? Like learning the process of coaching, and that comes through maybe it's training and reading and things like that. But just coaching people, you will get better as a coach as you coach. And then some way of selling, right? Marketing and selling, having some system process by which you generate leads and close deals. And then just trying it. Like I remember when I started as a coach, I just ran workshops. I probably ran 40 workshops in the first 6 months. Find people, run workshops, just do the work, build the reps, figure out what works, what doesn't, and quickly figure out where you want to focus.
I wouldn't repeat what Bruce said, but I would say, think about why you're doing this, right? What is it that matters to you here? And where do you want to be 10, 20 years out in the future? It was really clear to me that I wanted to help leaders with their vision to build a better world, and that I wanted to get to some huge number of them before I retired. So I figured out that number was 5 million. And then I started thinking about how the hell am I going to do that?
I would add that find the courage to fail fast instead of failing slowly, because failing slowly sucks, and getting those reps in and being able to talk more about what you do. Don't talk less about it, even if it's wrong. Okay, it's better to get it out of you than to, if you want to become a master, you have to be an apprentice first, right? And so you have to keep going at the craft. And if you really want to be a coach, treat it like a craft instead of just a money thing, right? Because if the best coaches, consultants, service providers are those that have honed in their craft, and you don't hone without failing fast. And so I just want to say that, because if you have an apprentice mindset, then you will always be looking to improve and make better, instead of thinking I need to be a master first, because that's just not possible.
That is such great advice, because there's a lot of personal development, not just for the person being coached, but for the coach too, professionally. And it's a tremendous adventure to build a really great coaching practice, all the relationships that you form with the clients. There's very few fields where you really have those kind of rewards that are so tangible and that can really last for a lifetime if you work with people over the long term. So this was, I appreciate all your parting words. I appreciate everybody who showed up today, because although we're on Zoom, I feel the community. I know a lot of the same people keep coming back, and it's just so wonderful to see people coming together to grow professionally. So I'm going to turn it over to Helena.
On the contrary, thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Elaine. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Bruce, and thank you, Bill. It's so amazing and enlightening to hear you all. So again, I just